Welcome to our show, AdAstra With. Today, we have the privilege of having Thomas Cobbs on the show for a great conversation covering high-performance habits, team building, the power of relationships, leadership, and supply chain issues plaguing the NewSpace industry.
Hey everybody, I'm thrilled to welcome Thomas Cobbs to the show. Thomas started his career at SpaceX as a buyer, where he's promoted year after year up to group manager for Dragon's supply chain before leaving SpaceX 2 years ago. Since then, Thomas has been a strategic advisor for Hadrian, a startup building factories for advanced manufacturing to support the space industry, among others. Thomas is also the co-founder and COO of Datum Source, a venture-backed B2B software as a service platform that streamlines the procurement services for custom manufactured components. Needless to say, Thomas is an expert in the supply chain realm for advanced industries like NewSpace, so really excited to hear your perspective on some of these topics we got for you today.
Excited to be here and chat about it.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And a brief background on myself and Brian. For those of you who don't know us, I started my career in talent acquisition advising, doing data analysis and optimizing the internal recruitment function of large name brand organizations, and then went on to work at a CNC distribution company, hiring teammates to do CNC sales and machine repairs, things like that, and eventually started a CNC staffing organization as a child company of that CNC distribution organization, which started my love for manufacturing and finding hard to find people, and have grown my career in talent acquisition since then. Now Brian and I own and operate AdAstra, which places technical and executive talent at NewSpace and Clean Technology startups.
My background, I'm a former SpaceX engineer, mainly in propulsion. Know Thomas from our time there together. Now founder, CTO, and COO of AdAstra. So let's take it away here with our first topic.
Perfect. Well, so listeners have heard your summary from us, but can you also give just a brief summary in your own words of what Datum Source is?
Yeah, so Datum Source is like you said, B2B SaaS solution. It's a platform. Think of it as a workflow management tool for procurement that fills that void in enterprise resource planning software. You know, there's this black hole between once you get to knowing what you needed to get made in your supply base and then actually issuing the purchase order from your ERP software. There's kind of this black hole there for the procurement workflow. So we're kind of filling that void, starting with supplier identification, the secure transfer of information, aka like, RFQ or commercial communication, and then supply-based strategy on the back end, as well as, working capital management when you get to the finance side of things. So,
And for those not as familiar with supply chain stuff, RFQ, that's request for quotes.
Yeah. So
Cool.
Sending out bids to suppliers, sending engineering drawings or solid models, in a controlled environment, regulated environment like ITAR, EAR, which more acronyms, but there are certain regulations coming down and that are in the industry now that you have to follow. So it's compliant with that, but also if you're trying to be secure with your IP in that transfer of technical specifications or data, that realm of communication. So.
And will Datum Source be focused specifically on NewSpace customers?
No. So we are really targeting the advanced manufacturing sector as a whole. So think of not just NewSpace, but aerospace in general, defense, robotics, semiconductors, medical devices, anything that requires, highly customized precision manufacturing. So
Very neat. I imagine there is like you said, a black hole, pretty big gap there in what the market needs. So it sounds like a really awesome solution.
Yeah, it's replacing email, Excel, notes, PDF, notebooks, pen and paper.
Yeah.
Love trying to replace email as much as we can.
Yeah, or improve it. So.
Yeah, there you go.
It's good.
I've had the pleasure of collaborating with you on hiring before, and I appreciate the advisory perspective that you've taken. In building teams at SpaceX, Hadrian, and Datum Source, what are some patterns you found in hiring top talent?
The one that a lot of people point to is kind of this self-motivation or I like to think of it as like you're driven by curiosity and like your own passion for whatever it is professionally. So people who, it's one thing that I knew when I interviewed at SpaceX. If you guys remember Brian Beldy, it was kind of like the last person I talked to before I moved on to like interviewing with a bunch of other departments. He had 5 minutes and he sat down and asked me a question. He was like, hey, what is one thing that's not on your resume that you could talk to me for hours about? And I ended up talking to him about like comic books because, I don't know, at the time for the last like 5-6 years I had done that. But it's something that stuck with me is that like you want to find people that have those things that they're like, whether it's in their professional life or out of their professional life, that just like drive them and motivate them and get them going, that they can talk for hours about, because they can clearly transfer that into other areas of the workplace. So that's like a major pattern. And then just like the thirst for improving the manufacturing industry and landscape as a whole, specifically, in America currently. So yeah.
That drive, I love that. I echo that sentiment. I think it's a really great point that you're making, that intrinsic motivation, that drive to accomplish, to do, right? That get up and go is a really hard thing. You can't want that for somebody. You can't have somebody else have that because you want it for them.
Yeah.
People have to have that intrinsic motivation, and you have to seek that out.
I think especially in high, I guess like, like high octane environments, right? Like early stage companies, it becomes easier to, address demanding situations because you're not having to get over this hurdle of like, okay, let's find a way to motivate everybody around this topic, which, is a key point as a leader of a company and a business and a team to do that. But it becomes a much harder hurdle to get over if you have a team of people who are struggling to find motivation day in, day out to do what they do professionally. So
yeah. I love that. Do you use that interview question?
I do personally. Yeah. I think I forgot who I was talking to about it. It was like Rob and Rob Bukalski, one of my co-founders, and Ryan Nagel, one of my other co-founders. I think we were having this conversation about like, what are the interview questions? Like, what's the one interview question that you really fall on? And I always fall on that one because it was something that Beldy asked me, but it was also something that Ryan Nagel kind of asked me in a different way when he interviewed me for supply chain at SpaceX. So sticks with me. I always find it brings out really fun things to talk about too. And it's always such a different answer. And I think it's great.
That's really cool. And having that high drive, it takes a lot of energy, right? You've got a lot of energy that you're putting into bringing the things that you're passionate about forward. And that I find that people who have that high drive not only have high drive in their professional setting, but comic books, right? They have things outside of their professional setting that also they have a lot of drive for. So I find that they're often people who have big energy output. So I guess, one, do you see yourself as someone who has big energy output? Do you see that as an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's a very accurate statement.
Yeah.
I have a ton of energy. Actually, people like to tell me that too, even if I'm not showing it sometimes.
Yeah. Same way. Yeah. Same way. People comment on that with me. So, sometimes it feels a little backhanded. Why do you have so much energy?
Oh, I love it.
Right. But what are some of your key staples to keep your mind and body in that flow state and able to have that high energy output?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big routine person. I think that's key to it. It doesn't. I genuinely don't think it matters like what the routine is. You hear a lot of people in these situations be like, I wake up at 4:30 and 5. It's all about the grind. But I really believe it's like, you find your routine that works for you, that keeps you going and allow you to have the stamina for higher energy output, and then you maintain that routine. I mean, for me, it's like one thing my wife and I try to do every day is, I get up, take the dog out, make coffee. She gets up, gets ready. I'll check emails and stuff while I'm waiting. And then we go try to like walk the dog together early in the morning. Cause it's something that like sets us both up for the day to be able to go do things professionally, having touched on things personally, but also like, and then we're in the groove, and we can take it from there. So it's like maintaining a routine, is key. And then also being very like self-aware of when that, when you're redlining a little bit too much, and being able to know what your like respite areas are to like go and actually be able to recoup and recover. So I think that's key. And then obviously I think like the third thing in my mind is like just having a really good support system around you to be able to talk and relate to things, or just have people listen to you. So obviously I mentioned and probably alluded to the fact that I have a really good partner, my wife, for that, but I have, really close friends. I have, I'm thankful to have really, co-founders I've worked with for like close to 7 years now that, we've been through the stuff together, especially at SpaceX. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's very key, is surround yourself with people that you can like actually, talk to about these things and relate to and have an ear to listen to.
Yeah. Wow, there's so much goodness in everything that you just said. So I just want to take a moment and break it apart. Like, first of all, I think it's really interesting. I think a lot of people who are listening would see you as this like very high performer who's worked in engineering and supply chain, and it's like very, kind of like hard corners, and there's a lot of metal. And a lot of what you just touched on was the emotional side of things, and that's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially at an environment like SpaceX where we saw it early on. Like, emotion tends to get pulled in a lot because you have, I forget what like the median age was at SpaceX, and not to get into age of hires, but when you're a young professional, you're at a place like SpaceX and you're very passionate about whatever facet it was that you worked in at SpaceX, be it engineering, supply chain, or finance, or whatever it was, you care a lot about it, and like you have these really massive swings of highs and lows with, I mean, we went through 3 or 4 anomalies. I was there from 15 to 20, and like I saw 3 or 4 terrible things happen. Right. And so you go from like these really high highs, these really low lows. So it's kind of hard to sometimes separate emotion from the day-to-day work. But like when you have manufacturing environment, things really do need to, at the end of the day, be driven by a lot of logic and, be fairly rigid and calculated. And so being able to like temper that and separate the emotion and actually be consciously aware of it so that it doesn't hinder the ability to succeed on the manufacturing side of things, which ultimately like brings success to the program, is super key. So,
Gosh, I love that. Yeah,
so
because
good.
if we say, well, this is driven by logic and data, so ignore the emotion can come out sideways and end up having way more impact than you want it to have. Where if you can process it healthily and use, high emotional intelligence to be able to manage and process emotion, you're actually able to focus on the data and logic more.
Yeah, and I think something that I learned early on too, like I know I played football in college, and early on I was big in athletics, but also, hardcore in academics too. But, learning adversity early on too, and how to channel that into like your output. So when you're at SpaceX and you launch humans for the first time, or like, you land a rocket for the first time, that's exhilarating and it motivates you. It's really easy to get motivated around something like that. But like, you have an Amos 6 situation where I wake up and as I'm walking out the door, my wife is in bed looking at her phone, and she's like, did SpaceX just blow up a launch? And I'm like, oh, we're not supposed to launch. Yeah. And then you come to the office and the pad's destroyed, Facebook's pissed and all this stuff. And
that was not a good day.
It was not a good day.
That put a damper on my morning beach volleyball.
Yep,
for sure.
That was a quiet. Yeah, when you walk into the office, it's usually quiet before 9, but like eerily quiet through up until the afternoon. Everyone's feeling it, but being able to channel that and motivate yourself, maybe even more around the negative side of things, to go and produce. I countless stories of that too. I mean, the IFA anomaly was probably like the most negatively motivating thing that I went through, but we came out like, orders of magnitude higher in terms of success at the end of that too. So it's just being conscious of that, I think is key. Yeah.
And IFA, that's the in-flight abort?
In-flight abort. Cool. Yeah. I don't know if in the news somewhere you can Google it, in-flight abort anomaly, and you'll see the fluid systems had a anomaly and it exploded during a test. I think it was a pressure test or something like that.
The Facebook anomaly that you were just mentioning was particularly tough on Brian, actually, because I think we were engaged at the time, and the payload was a portion of the payload was from Facebook. And my uncle, who is like a very big, he's a very important person in my life, it had designed, a lot, like his patented work was on that payload, and he was at
the Cape when this happened.
So it was
and we're newly dating, and
talk about having to separate emotions.
Ooh, sweating.
That was in the back of the mind for sure.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But another thing that you just mentioned is you're talking about routines. And one of my favorite books, I've listened to it a bunch of times, where our company's actually doing a book club on it right now, is Atomic Habits. And I love how the author breaks down, James Clear, is that his name? The author breaks down habits into really functional, psychological, really makes habits very attainable. And I just love how you were very specifically talking about utilizing routines that actually energize you. You can read all of the best morning routines on every blog, and if it's not actually energizing you, right? If like getting up at 4:30 and doing the grind isn't actually feeding you, it's not going to be as useful. One trick that I really love doing is to take a week of your calendar, of your schedule, or maybe 2 weeks, and go through it and think through every activity and highlight it either green. It felt like it was, putting you in the green.
I should go grab my
right?
my notebook and show you what it looks like. But
yeah,
I do something similar.
Yeah, or highlight it red and go, what of this red can I get out, right? What can I offload, give to somebody who it's going to green for, so that I can really focus in getting myself and keeping myself in flow.
Green being energizing, red being de-energizing.
Yep.
Very
yeah,
cool.
I don't do something like that, but that's key. I would love to try that out. I'm a big hard to-do list person. Like physically in a notebook, I think like physically writing something is much more, I don't know, it helps me think about it more than just typing it, or maybe speaking it and recording it, because it takes longer to write something, so you're thinking about it longer, but also it separates me from like everything else that's going on in front of my face. And I do the thing, I actually think I learned it from the Power of Habit book, but where I write out every single one of my to-dos, and I bucket them into personal life to-dos, and then I have internal related operations tasks, and then like external related sales or BD or so like this would fall under the like external to-do category, right? So and then I prioritize each of those sections, and then I focus on the highest priority one first. I really single out like the big three for each of those sections, and then I make sure that those are like at least end of week priorities. But that's when I'm able to, when I'm finished with what I do in the morning and I get into my work, I'm able to open up my to-do list and I know exactly what I need to go start on. And then it also helps me remember kind of like, as other things in the company are happening or in my personal life are happening, I know how that's impacting the highest priority items. And it keeps me able to stay, like you said, energized around what actually matters the most in real time. So.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. I love this stuff.
That's a really good one. I've never heard that before. I think that's a really
I forget, it was
idea.
like the CEO of Procter & Gamble or something like did it, or I forget what it is. I'm misquoting something. I learned it somewhere. It's been working for me for like 5 years. So
that's wonderful. Yeah, very, very cool. So switching gears just a little bit, how big is Datum now?
We have 18 full-time employees, and then we have 3 software engineering contractors on top of full-time employees. So I'd say 21, give or take, 1 or 2 people that we have coming in and out from a contractual standpoint. So.
Okay. Awesome. And from managing teams at SpaceX to leading the organization at Datum Source. What has
Either one works.
What has changed over the past 5-ish years for how you think about leadership?
Oh man, that's a tough one. No, I think at its core, it shouldn't really change when you're leading, one person versus a group of people. It's really like getting people on the same page as you. From a vision standpoint, but also a priority standpoint, making sure, the group or the individual is aligned on that front is very key. And we always used to joke about this, but like, Ryan Nagel, when he was my manager at SpaceX, he would always joke about this. He's like, when you go into management, you're going to have to say things to your employees or the group that you're leading. You're going to have to repeat yourself 5 to 10 times, right? It's like you can't go into a leadership role assuming that, you shouldn't go into a leadership role assuming that people are going to be able to dissect what you say and take the non-priority items versus the priority items, because you're their leader, so they're gonna assign a heavy weight to everything you talk about. So you have to be very conscious of that fact. But yeah, you also have to make sure that you don't go in with the assumption that the first time you say something is going to be able to be the last time you say it for that person to know exactly what you're trying to say. So reiterating what you say, making sure you're saying it in different ways so that it is, able to be comprehended and retained by everybody, because everybody's communication style is different. So yeah, being able to be conscious of the people as they are people, and how they're able to actually digest information is key too. So I think that's kind of at its core, alignment and communication. But I think the difference between, leading a group at SpaceX versus leading, a group over here at Datum is, at SpaceX, it was very much this subject matter expertise that I had built over the course of, half a decade, which in SpaceX years is like, 10 to 20 years or whatever. So I very much, a group of people around what I'm doing. And then now in Datum Source, you have a section of the company that are software engineers, right? And I'm not a software engineer. I've read a little bit of, enough about it to understand like what terminology means and how to converse, but I'm not a software engineer by trade. So it's hard to lead somebody at a technical level. So, right now it's kind of stepping into that world of learning how to be a non-technical leader for a group that is technically focused in a different area that like I'm not well versed in is key. So understanding, how to communicate properly with that group, how to adjust to certain, setting milestones and goals and stuff like that has been a key thing for me to kind of overcome and look into. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really, really great. I love that message of not expecting to just say things once. In fact, I like to be very aware that a key element of being a leader is figuring out how to give the same message repeatedly in different ways so that you are truly painting a vision and setting a goal for your team. And to go kind of, I've already told you this, right? You got to kind of switch the framework and go, yep, that's what I'm doing, is I'm continually painting the vision and making sure that everybody's marching to the same beat of the drum.
Yeah. And not only are people, do they learn in different ways, but repetition is so important. People so rarely learn something because they heard it once or saw it once. The repetition is what drives the vision and really like hammers things home that matters. So yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, I think an important part of that is establishing a clear and effective feedback loop and process. So like not just dictating or telling the people what needs to happen or what you've been thinking about and prioritizing, but also having them have an effective way for them to kind of give that back to you in their own, way, so that you understand they've retained it and they're on track and aligned with, the vision, the goal, and on the path. So yeah, I think that's very, very key.
So good. Very, very cool. So at AdAstra, we're very directly in the business of maintaining healthy relationships. And I'd argue that even outside of recruiting, it's building like business is about relationships, right? And I'd imagine that in your realm of expertise is quite similar. So first of all, do you agree?
And 100%.
And then second of all, what are some non-negotiables for you in building healthy business relationships?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, I love this. I love this question because when I was training or, mentoring new buyers at SpaceX or procurement individuals at SpaceX, you had to coach a lot of these people on building relationships internally and externally, and how key that is to the actual function of supply chain. So when you're in supply chain, and I'm going to get specific here in the realm of this department, but when you're in supply chain, you interact with every single different department at a company. You're on the design side, you're within your internal supply chain org, which is massive. And then you have, the production side, manufacturing side, but then you also have finance and accounting, you have marketing, you have legal, all these things that come into play at certain, degrees of magnitude and areas along the way. But then you also have this external supply base in procurement that you then have to interact with. And it is crazy when you talk about like how many subcontract manufacturers there are in this country, but then you actually go experience it, and it is scarily a very small world.
Yeah.
Right. And, there were things that you could do at SpaceX to improve the relationship with your external supply base that would have trickle down effects with your internal relationships as well as the success of the program. So, my non-negotiables in this realm is like, over communicate and being aggressively transparent is key. Like, have integrity, be honest. The truth comes out no matter what. And really understand what at its core, the people you're building a relationship with are trying to achieve, and figure out, it really is that negotiation, that the negotiation strategy of we both can win if we interact a certain way, and we do business a certain way, or even in your personal life. So that to me is communication, transparency is key, and being proactive with a lot of this stuff and not reactive with a lot of these things is key as well.
So good.
What do you let me take a step back here. So it's very, very common, obviously, that in supply chain, it's so regular that a supplier doesn't deliver on time or delivers something with poor quality. How do you advise people to manage those relationships when things start to go south? What are the right ways to communicate and interact when things aren't flowing?
I love this.
There's probably a lot of bad practices out there. What are the good practices?
Okay. So, first off, never assume.
Yeah.
So never make an assumption. You can, make a calculated assumption, but never bring that into your reaction until you've actually had a conversation with whatever party it is. Let's say, let's just take the example of, buyer and seller. So you're dealing with your supplier, or in this specific instance, you have a machine shop doing a part and they deliver something out of tolerance and late. My thing is you should first always look at yourself and your environment first, make your bed before you start pointing fingers, kind of a deal, clean your room, right? So it's the idea of, was this part designed for manufacturer? Was designed for manufacturability, really addressed on the front end? Did we set this supplier up for success to make this part to tolerance?
That's good.
Really
right.
good. Next
is, where were the stresses on the delivery requirements? Is this historically a 12-week lead time part that we compressed down to 4 weeks? Was this made out of some sort of exotic material that historically is really hard to deal with? Those types of things, as well as getting into kind of what we're building at Datum Source is was this the right person to actually make it in the first place? If it's a titanium part, was it somebody, titanium part with hundreds of units, with tight tolerances? Was it some guy with a Haas,
right.
$30,000 Haas machine in the garage somewhere in El Segundo? Or, was it a company that's really used to dealing with high precision titanium, multi-X machine parts, right? So, and then during that phase of actually going through and then making it, did we redesign the part while it was there? Did we discuss the impact that was going to have in real time when we threw those curveballs at the supplier? Did we, after we actually had that discussion and found out what the impact would be, did we actually communicate that back to the organization in a way that would be either contractually binding or traceable in any manner? Did the purchase order get updated to reflect these things? And then, if something was of high criticality, be it, delivery, were we actively in communication with the supplier while they were making this thing, so that we knew that they, all the stuff that we could have helped with preventing any slips, we took those measures, as well as them. Did they consider certain factors, that we see to hinder on-time delivery or, high quality performance. So making sure those boxes are covered and checked. There's a lot of work you can do on the front end to that, but before you go out and actually have, slap the wrist of the supplier, checking those boxes and then having the conversation of why was this late? Or why was this out of tolerance? Is key to understand, because sometimes things just happen, but what we've experienced for the most part, is that procurement's historically been my supply base is people from, based on tribal knowledge. It's who I knew, who I've known, first degree, they've worked with the shop, or they've worked with this company, or, they have the best SEO because they came up on Google first when you typed in 5X machining. No, it's we're trying to help connect people with the best people to make what you're trying to get made from a logic driven technical sourcing perspective of like they have the right equipment, skill set, history, background, whatever it is, in order to satisfy the requirements on the front end. So yeah, I think that's key.
I love that. So yeah, when I was SpaceX engineer and I was working with vendor made parts quite a bit, I think it's very natural to have a reactive response to something going wrong,
Yeah.
but it sounds like reflective is maybe a little bit better of a place to start. So that's really great advice. And then on a previous show, we had Chris Thompson on, and we were talking about horizontal integration and about how to leverage key suppliers and all that fun stuff. And we were talking about the risk associated with any mishaps with your suppliers. And he was speaking to a way to hedge that with different contracts that essentially encourage performance, and how you can build that into contracts to basically incentivize that things are on time, decentivize being late, and quality and all that, those types of things. Is that something that you see common in the industry? And what do you recommend on that front?
Yeah, I mean, it's a semi-loaded question because it's all, it's very unique to situations, right? But, there's pros and cons with doing things, contractually incentivized for delivery or quality. I think it's easier to contractually incentivize for quality rather than delivery. But like I said, if you're going to bind someone contractually around quality, you have to make sure that you've covered all your bases so that they're set up 100% for success. So there's nothing that can come back on you as the person who, hindered the supplier from being able to achieve that. On the delivery incentive side, you can do certain things contractually to incentivize delivery, but at scale, sometimes that can hurt your, the cost of goods, sold that goes into your product, because you can deal with price inflation baked into, certain incentives for the supplier to hedge being late on something on that front. But I think that from a delivery standpoint, again, you got to look at the front end of like, if we're going to incentivize for better delivery, we have to make sure we cover our bases on the front end in terms of like, okay, if we're compressing lead time, like how much are we compressing versus what the standard is?
And how will that impact the quality?
How will that impact the quality, right? Yeah. The cost quality delivery triangle, pick two.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you have to look at. But I think there's ways to do that. But I think it definitely is really relative to which suppliers you're working with and the situations that you're under. So I think make the biggest difference.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the triangle and picking two. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard this one, where you can have quality, you can have it fast, cheap, or high quality, or you can have two of the three, but not all three, right? Sorry, that was a horrible description.
It's coming quick and intolerance, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or it's cheap and quick, and you're gonna have to do a lot of issue disposition. And or whatever the third one is.
Is that pretty accurate in your experience? Is that a mantra you live by?
Yeah, it's very accurate. End of 2015, we had just landed a rocket for the first time, so it was like, okay, we got to be quick to reusability. And then it was Dragon 2 was fighting to build a capsule to do in-flight abort and demo 1 so that we could fly humans for racing Boeing. So it was all about speed, and it was all about cost, because the cost of building a rocket or spacecraft is very capital intensive. And so it was, how do we get things quick and fast? And what happened was, because there wasn't a ton of products being built at the time at SpaceX. It's kind of funny to think about. It was really only the Falcon 9 and the Dragon 1 capsule and the Merlin engine, right? And then there was these NPI new product introduction projects over here that we were kind of working on. But it was easy to band-aid the quality issues that you were finding, because engineers could issue dispositions across a lot of the out of tolerance components, or qualify something during testing before assembly or something like that, right? And then as you had more and more products come to market from SpaceX, and the engineering departments grew, and the stress was still on time to market, quality became a massive negative impact to the company. where engineers had massive issue disposition backlogs that were having to get burned down before launches. And then when we started looking at it from a cost standpoint to the business, cost to quality, which is what we called it, was so impactful to the business negatively that we had to start looking at going with suppliers where the price per unit would raise a bit, but it was actually raising at a lower rate than what the negative impact to the cost of the business on the back end from a cost of quality standpoint was doing. So I think when you look at cost in that triangle, you really got to assess cost to the business as a whole, not just your price per unit. Yeah. And you got to remember too that like if somebody says they can do something in 4 weeks, you need it in 4 weeks, but you really need it in 6, and you have somebody over here that says they can do it in 8, and that person who can do it in 8 is actually the best person to do it. The person over here 4 is you're really taking a gamble. You might end up getting that part in 8 weeks from the person who said they could do it in 4 because they can't do the part right. So it's
right.
You gotta de-risk yourself as much as possible and understand things more so from a impact to the business side of things rather than just like certain specific scenarios, right? So I think that's key when assessing that. I know there's a lot of information, but
come out of tunnel vision and really kind of have a more holistic view of how everything's going to come together.
Yeah. Because I think you set yourself up for failure in other areas of the business, thinking that you succeeded over here when you actually could be in a better position long term. Thinking about things holistically. So.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into the phrase "you get what you pay for," right? Does that tend to be pretty true to your experience as well? If someone's charging 10 to 20% more, is it usually worth that, or how do you navigate that in early supplier relationships if you don't have a lot of data to look back on?
Yeah, I mean it's a good tie into what we're doing with Datum, right? Is it's not just paying more is going to get you a better product or right product. Like when we talk about logic-based sourcing, as like a tagline for Datum or like technical sourcing, when you say take like a precision engine component versus like a simple, 3-axis aluminum bracket or something like that, right?
Yep.
And then you have like this like, Inconel injector housing or something like over here, right? So a machine, pretty much any machine can make anything. This is a very like general statement, but like, given enough time, you can pretty much make anything on any machine. But when you're paying more, what we're saying, paying more to get what you need is like, typically it's a more expensive machine. Mm-hmm. You have a more skilled machinist or programmer who is has more experience with those types of more intense engineered components. And that gets baked into the per unit price, right? So you can pay, 40, 50% less for the person with the house over here. But again, to that triangle, like it's going to take them a much longer time. They're going to eat through a lot more cutters than the person over here who's probably using, 800K to $1 million machine, with a really skilled machinist who's been there for 20, 30 years. And that's all part of what you're paying for, right? So, being able to understand when you have higher prices, what's being baked into those higher prices, is it all risk because the person's just taking off more than what they're used to, like biting off more than what they're used to? Or is it somebody who's actually really set up to do this, has the tailored equipment that's more expensive, has the more skilled person? So back to the point of like radical transparency with your supply base and communication, being able to have that dialogue with your supply base on the front end before you actually when you get the quote back, or even when you're issuing your quotes out to your supply base, knowing, okay, I'm going to these suppliers because they have X, Y, Z, and that's set up for this component that I'm trying to go get made, is going to set you up to be able to evaluate that and not get burned either way. And that's what we're doing in the platform is on the supplier identification side is you're able to actually take your engineered component, know what you need to search for in the supply base based on whatever parameters it is, and then we'll be able to show you the suppliers that have those capabilities and skill sets to actually manufacture that. So that way, if you're blasting out RFQs to 3 suppliers, you're making sure that you've leveled the playing field for what that standard cost, quality, delivery quote you're getting back is gonna look like.
Very great. So so essentially the platform makes it easy to weed out the people who you might think to reach out to, but you probably shouldn't reach out to. Is that fair? Is there a lot more to it than that?
No, 100%. Or expand your supply base or expand your reach to the people who actually should be making it, right? Or, supply chain is such a loaded concept. There's so many factors, right? It's like you could have a supplier with a Haas, a Grobe, and Integrex, like all very good machines that could be used for very different things. And they could pretty much cover your entire product. But if they're at capacity and they can't take on any of your work, you're going to need to find somebody with one-to-one skill set, right? So being able to, hedge capacity risk on that front, or, it's still very much, specifically just talking about this example of CNC machining, it's still very much a skilled trade. There's people involved and people come and go. And so if you lose your best programmer who is in charge of programming all your high complexity materials or components, right? And now you're more towards the simple complexity side of things, understanding that in real time, being able to see that in your supply-based search when you're going out and doing that. That's what we're enabling. So, yeah.
Very cool. So we're working with a lot of early stage startups in the new space arena. I'm sure you are as well. There's, a new exciting company popping up every day, and I love that. But often a supply chain person is not the first hire, and often not in the first 10, 20, maybe even more. What's your opinion or approach to how startups should strategize growing their supply chain skill set in-house? Can they do that with their engineers? When should they hire someone? How do you approach that?
I think it's definitely unique to the company's early stage milestone goals, right? If you have a hardware company, typically these hardware companies are building 1 to 2 products to prove out the concept before they go out and maybe raise another round of funding to scale or whatever it is. But if you're a company that's going out and you're immediately going to production, which doesn't make sense, but if you're going out and you're scaling up, you want a supply chain hire ASAP, right? But
there are some startups out there where a key part of their business is scaling with manufacturing. And so they're probably likely to want to hire this person sooner than someone who's doing a couple one-offs for the first few years.
Yeah, I think it's important to at least have supply chain strategy or supply-based strategy be something considered way early on from the get-go. I don't necessarily think a supply chain hire is something that needs to happen early on. I think you can very much enable internal people to be it engineers, or maybe you have one ops person who handles admin and finance, stuff like that. But historically procurement in general has been a very administrative role, and I think it's really important. This is kind of going a little bit further than your question, but
it's great.
At least the most important thing is that as an organization, you're enabling the procurement group or person or supply chain person to be strategic early on and not just administrative. I agree with involving go just with the positive. I agree with involving engineering early on in understanding who the suppliers are and who's making what you're trying to go get made. But oftentimes with hardware companies trying to reach an initial milestone, you have these fluctuations in demand periods or sprints, right? You have a very heavily designed period. Then you might have a 3 to 6 month go out, get it made. And then you have this okay, everything's in-house, let's start building. And then it's let's test, let's prove the concept. Now let's go get more funding to scale. So I think you don't necessarily need to hire a supply chain person or a procurement person in that first, timeline. As a full-time hire, one thing that we have at Datum is our managed services department, which is while we're bringing our software platform to market, is actively sourcing components for a lot of these new space early hardware companies, kind of like buyer for hire type deal.
Very cool.
And the beauty with that is it offers the flexibility of hey, we're now in this high demand procurement cycle.
Right.
Help us go establish, help us go immediately establish a strong foundation of suppliers. Help us actually go execute these contracts and make sure we're not getting burned. Help us establish the relationships so that, when everything's delivered and we actually go hire our full-time employee for supply chain, that our company has a relationship established with these suppliers. It's not just Datum's relationship that's being levered, as well as hey, you're a small hardware startup, you're only spending $150,000 to $200K, or maybe $500K to $1 million versus a Northrop over here who is locking in a 3-year contract for 2.5 million. So you can leverage Datum managed services like, hey, we're actually spending a ton of money on behalf of like a host of customers. We get to leverage that spend influence, a la carte to these smaller hardware startups.
So cool.
Helping
It's really
with
valuable.
Yeah, helping with like response time and actually prioritizing, getting bids reviewed and actually worked on, stuff like that. So I think it's just going back to your question. I think it's key to pull in supply-based strategy early on. Like don't just wing it. Putting everything in Xometry is going to burn you.
Yeah.
It's kind of a thing of like you're reducing the transparency in your supply base. If you're sticking with that tribal knowledge in the Google, you're going to get burned from like a quality standpoint or delivery standpoint, right? So, I think that's just early on, but the key is to hire. I think in my mind, I would hire the full-time person probably around that period when you have very high level of confidence that you're moving into the world of like, okay, we will end up scaling in the next 6 to 12 months. Let's go kind of establish that base.
Great. 6 to 12 months before starting to scale up. That's really great.
And when you're looking for that person, so let's say this is a company that companies that you've worked at, right? Their production, they've got engineers working on production. If you're looking for a head of supply chain, would you tend to look for somebody who has a very technical background, like a STEM education, or more somebody who has a supply chain background, who has experience advising engineers on their designs based on supply chain expertise?
Yeah, I think, we always talk about that. The beauty of what we're trying to build with Datum is we're trying to commercially enable technical folks, and we're also trying to technically enable commercial folks, right? I think in my mind, the ideal supply chain person the ideal head of supply chain for an early stage hardware company is somebody, from your second point of, has the supply chain procurement commercial background, but has the skill set or the experience to understand technically what is trying to get made. They don't necessarily need to be able to sit in like a preliminary design review or critical design review with you guys and pull up prints and be able to say like, oh yeah, like the length to diameter ratio is greater than 3:1. So you're going to get chatter on the internal board. Like you don't need somebody to like sit there and be able to tell you that, but you need somebody to sit there and say, I know the importance and the value of facilitating that review. We need to have that done in order to be successful. Let's make sure that's a part of our standard operating practices. Like, let's make sure that like, everything I told you early on of like the boxes to check from like the retroactive review, like let's make sure that person knows that those are the boxes we needed to check before we go out and source something, or what are those boxes we can actually forego because of this environment, enables us to do that. Like what are things that like would be risk factors in a higher production environment, not necessarily in a dev environment. So I think that's like the key, like strategically the first person you want to bring on is kind of in that realm. Yeah. Right. So very commercially strong, but also like understands the technical landscape in the realm of like the risk it brings to, getting to market or, being able to scale up, something like that. So.
Very cool. Yep.
Let's see here. So circling back a little bit more to when we're talking about companies that don't have that supply chain person in-house and you have engineers sourcing their own parts, cutting the POs, doing all that work themselves, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see when engineers are doing this without much guidance, and what are some solutions? And I think we've talked to some of these already, like, not considering cost of quality and stuff like that, but are any other things jump into mind that you think that engineers could use a little the training here?
And I want to say too, it's I don't want to generalize engineers. I think that I've worked with a host of experienced and inexperienced engineers, and some people have a better sense of how to deal with supplier relationships and scenarios better than others. But one thing I do see that comes up the most is engineers care a lot about what they're designing and what they're getting made. You have to be cognizant that in the US, at least, the majority of subcontract manufacturers are small businesses of 20 people or less. That, cash flow is not a thing that's very, like free cash flow is not like readily apparent, like with a lot of these companies. Like they're very much a pay to pay, paycheck to paycheck type company. So every one of their jobs is very important to their business, especially with early stage companies. You can kind of fall into this pitfall of, hey, I'm an engineer, I designed this thing. It's really cool. It's revolutionizing renewable energy. You know, it's going to be a game changer. And then you go to this mom and pop shop to get it made, and you think like, this is the only thing at this shop that matters. like they should be picking up every one of my calls. They should be responding to my emails. Like, and if they don't, they're a terrible supplier. And so like just being cognizant of the fact that this is a small business, it's hectic. They're usually, you know, the ones who are being used a lot are usually like at capacity and very, very busy. And in order and they're very low margin to start out. So just being cognizant of the fact that like every time you introduce something that isn't a standard practice for them, throws a wrench in their process, and it affects like the cost of their business, right? And then their ability to actually make money and grow and you know, pay their employees and stuff like that too. So being conscious of the importance of what you need to go talk to the supplier about, or what you need to emphasize with the supplier, comes into play as being a big success factor in that relationship early on. So understanding when you opt into that like you are entering a landscape where you aren't the most important piece of the puzzle for them, and that the more I change this design, or the more I ask for things to be altered, is going to affect, you know, cost, quality, or delivery, and being able to have those conversations. And then again, going back to the thing of like documenting it, and so that it's transparent and there's traceability along the way, so that, you know, if something takes 10 weeks, you end up at that end of the 10 weeks. And if it was out of tolerance or late, or, you know, the company incurred more cost to making the part than they thought, you're able to look back and understand, okay, I know how we got to that endpoint, and they're able to see that as well. Because ultimately, if you're building a hardware company, or like a product in general, you want to make sure that the best thing you could do is work with suppliers that you can scale that product with, or know who you can't scale the product with, and understanding that situation, right? So being able to build that relationship early on is key. So if you understand those factors and you have open communication with them, you want to avoid the pitfalls of like animosity in that relationship. But you also set yourself up for success the second and third and fourth time you go around to get that part made with the same person, because you both had lessons learned on either side that you then work through. So now you're set up better the second time because you're able to avoid those. So I know it's a lot of running around that question, but
that's
hopefully
fantastic.
You know what I love about this is you're obviously very technically insightful, but what's really hitting me here is the business impact that you're highlighting throughout this whole conversation about understanding what matters to the people that you're interacting with. So you've talked about, you know, when, the supplier's not delivering something well, and you came back to personal responsibility. Like that was the first like massive chunk of what you looked at, right? Is what can I control? What's my responsibility in this? How can I make a better impact come out of this? And then when we're talking about suppliers here, you're talking about their motivations, their emotional needs, like what is driving this person. And in my experience, like understanding what motivates somebody and how you can further their needs is like, that's the essence of operating effectively in business, right? So just really, really powerful. Thank you. This is awesome.
How do you find win-wins in your vendor relationships? And if you're doing all these custom things that they're not great at, that's probably not a win for them, and then that's not going to be a healthy long-term relationship.
Don't force it too. Like it's I think there's a fear that, especially like what we're trying to alleviate, is like, hey, I only know 10 suppliers. I only remember 10 suppliers I worked with at SpaceX. So I'm only operating with those 10. It's like the fear that if I can't get this done with this one person, I've now limited an already limited supply base. You have to be able to be like, all right, this is actually not the best thing for both of us to be working on, as much as you like what I'm building, as much as I need this to get made. I need to go find somebody better suited for this. But also keeping in mind that, like, you know, leveraging good relationships you have with suppliers and being able to, hey, it actually might make more sense for me to go over here because I have a good relationship with them, and now this fits their core competency. Let's go work with them. So yeah, don't force things. Be able to walk away from situations like that. And then a big thing too is like coaching and finding suppliers that are able to do that as well. So I think a good thing to look at is you want a supplier to say no to you if they can't do it, right? It's upfront being very transparent with them that if they say no, it doesn't mean that now have this negative perception in your mind of them as a supplier, right? It's like it actually it gives them it gives me at least a more positive perception.
It's a way to build trust.
100%. Yeah. And it explains to you that they know exactly what they're good at. Right. It's like if they know what they can deliver, they're able to say yes or no to certain scenarios. So I think that's key too.
So good.
Yeah. Love it. So I'd love to pivot just a little bit here because I think the last few years, supply chain has gotten a lot of news time, right? And I bet some people I bet people are pretty interested in your expertise on the supply chain issues that we've seen the last couple of years since COVID began. I'm curious what issues that you've identified that have impacted the new space industry specifically since COVID hit. What happened and what's still happening today as a result of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, COVID put a lot of stress on like logistics in general. So, you saw a lot of negative impact to internationally sourced items just because like availability of shipping things overseas, bringing things back from, European or Asian countries that we were sourcing raw material or machined or manufactured components from. There's a lot of stress on that, as well as like the cost. I think the cost went up like 16x, per container over the last like 4 years, something like that. With respect to how it impacts, new space, you have a lot of components that, like I'd say it more so comes down to, if you're operating in new space domestically, you have ITAR, EAR controls as well as DFAR controls, right? Which is, relates to raw material and component sourcing with allied nations as well as like, domestically sourced materials. As you stress logistics internationally, as well as like the war in Ukraine or something where you're stressing a massive raw material supply in a certain area, then you're stressing the supply across the board for those, foundational items. You see this a lot with like raw titanium, steel, aluminum, stuff like that. It's putting more stress on the domestic, aluminum, steel, titanium markets, stuff like that, which the aerospace industry domestically relies very heavily on. And then if you start introducing all these other industries coming in that historically were able to access, international supply that are now looking for domestic supply because, the cost of the business since shipping went up so much is now pretty much a moot point because it's going to cost the same thing to get it made domestically. They're introducing a ton of new demand to an already stressed environment. So that's been a big, impact factor from COVID, but also with like the stuff that's going on in Ukraine and Russia, but also, with semiconductors and stuff like that, where you have an already stressed environment from demand and supply. And now you're introducing, funny enough, in the aerospace, now you're introducing, or advanced manufacturing, because now every car is a computer. You're introducing a massive amount of demand for semiconductors in an area that historically didn't have it, right? So, and that it's just a matter of aggressively accelerated demand and supply in these specific areas that were already stressed. But I think that stuff like Datum coming to light, or like a Hadrian, right? You're introducing these. There's a lot of new companies that are trying to prevent this from becoming an absolute catastrophe, right? So introducing ways to accelerate supply or alleviate pain on the demand side, I think is key. So specifically with new space, it's just like raw material as well, just from like pricing and availability standpoint too. So understanding that the cost of things will be going up for at least the interim. But I think what's good about the industry is that like, with like a SpaceX, the cost to access space has dropped significantly. So a lot of these companies still might be able to shoulder that burden of cost of goods sold increase because their actual end cost to get onto a rocket to get to space or actually build a rocket and then launch it is decreasing like macroeconomically. So
and to break down one or two of these topics just a little bit more, I'd say in general it feels like there's growing concern about sourcing products from China or other nations that are politically unfriendly to the United States, we'll say. Does the existence of ITAR and these other regulations, does that kind of inherently protect the new space industry from some of these growing concerns about dependence on countries like China? Or are we still sourcing raw material? Like, what is our connection with these countries in the new space arena?
Yeah, I'm not like a subject matter expert on sourcing things from China, but no, I think it goes back to the point.
Probably more than me, though.
Yeah, to an extent. I hear about it and listen about it, read about it more. But in an ITAR environment, like, you're really not affected by sourcing things from China. Excuse me. But like I said earlier, you're introducing more demand in an area that was already stressed to begin with. So like, exotic raw material supply domestically, you might have new industries coming in, like, modular construction startups that have like high stack up tolerances because they're building, modular. I don't know. I don't want to allude to any customers. But you end up in these scenarios where they want to tap aerospace supply chain, defense supply chain, and that's stressing the already stressed supply, right?
Yeah.
So that's what you'll see significantly. It's not very much like, we can't source from China anymore. We don't want to because there's high risk. It's really like, these people who are de-risking by going away from China or other countries like that, they're now entering into our space, which has really been set up for the last 20, 30 years as kind of like a set it and forget it, everyone's at capacity kind of deal. And then it's like, okay, well, where do we go now find, we're having to, a lot of these companies, especially like defense primes, like a Lockheed or Raytheon, when they're dealing with their tier one suppliers, they're having to go out and find, backup solutions to a lot of these things, which is putting stress on organizations, stuff like that. So I think that's what you'll see.
Super insightful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So to wrap us up here, is there anything else about Datum that you would like to share that you guys are up to that we haven't covered, that any pain that you're alleviating from your clients that you want to discuss here?
Yeah, I mean, so it was good that we touched on the kind of idea of like, connecting the right people, trying to make the stuff that you're trying to make. That, at its core, that's really what we're coming to market with and what we're trying to fix, as well as like, we like to say it's the the transfer of capital, transfer of goods and services, and transfer of information is really like what supply chain is in the world of, right? And so we're trying to improve each facet of that. So, transfer of goods and services, find the right people to make your stuff. Transfer of information, trying to build a very good user experience as well as heightened security around that. And the transfer of capital, which, we're not a marketplace because we've seen digital manufacturing marketplaces kind of plateau when they enter this production world, because we think it's naive that, OEMs like a SpaceX or a Lockheed or something like that are going to deviate from an ERP software for production procurement. So we built this workflow management tool, but the idea of like transfer of capital, you have a vast landscape of small mom and pop businesses like we talked about. Cash is king to these companies, and a lot with NewSpace or advanced manufacturing. They're not the net payment terms that a lot of these companies are dealing with are unfriendly to the small manufacturing company and very friendly to the large original equipment manufacturer, right? So we have this side of the product that we're working on called Datum Capital, TBD on what that name is, but it's this world of supply chain finance under trade finance, where you're going to see a lot of growth in this part of the industry over the next 5 to 10 years. Because there's trillions of dollars tied up in poor working capital management. And a lot of these small mom and pop companies that want to grow with a lot of these early hardware companies are going to struggle to do so. So we're initially rolling this out. Conceptually, we're working on this play where, we can get suppliers in this world where they can, it's reverse factoring, where they can opt into net zero payment terms at a discounted rate. These OEMs like SpaceX could maintain their net payment terms or work with more favorable net payment terms to them without hindering their supply base. So like I said, it's building resiliency in the supply base, their ability to scale and actually be able to afford to keep up with this rapidly growing sector of demand in advanced manufacturing.
That is so neat.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And we'll have info in the show notes, but when can people expect to see the product be rolled out?
Yeah, so we're kind of having like a soft beta rollout of our search supplier identification feature of the platform over the next couple weeks, just with like a controlled subset of some of our existing services customers. But come early 2023, I'd say probably around January, February timeline, we'll probably bring it to more of the mass market on the search side and supply-based management side. The supply chain finance side of things is something that we are going to be beta testing as well in the next 2 quarters, and that's something you probably see come to light more so middle of next year. Our services side of the business is, we like say, semi-mature and actively roaring right now.
Very
So
cool.
if you're an early stage hardware company and need support on supply-based strategy or actual procurement execution, think of it as like an agency model. It's really much like buyer for hire, pop into your org, no learning curve kind of a deal. And then that secure file share and quoting side of the platform will also be an early 2023 thing to look at. So
Sounds like next year's a big year.
Are you
next 6 months. Yeah.
Are you placing a buyer at the company or fractionally? Like, what does that design
It's
look
a
like?
good question. So we aren't placing anybody. It's it's really an agency model. So it's we come in, when you hire Datum, you get the group.
Okay.
Right. But every company that we work with has a primary point of contact.
Yeah.
We have a really good internal system that we've set up using tools like Airtable that, it's very SpaceX specific, but I mean, to other companies too. You guys might remember it as like the RFPO queue, right? Or like your request for purchase or request for production queue. So you have incoming signals from the companies we're working with that get triaged through that single point of contact, but roll out to the team, and then the team helps source those components.
Awesome.
And then we don't, again, radical transparency, we aren't blocking any of the customers from the suppliers.
Yeah.
Everyone issues their purchase orders directly to these suppliers. So the suppliers are being onboarded into their system. And when we're kind of banking on the fact that there's always going to be a design churn and there's always going to be new hardware companies on the services side. So, we want to eventually exit with some of these companies on the services side. And leave them with strong supply-based strategies. And, the hope is that we can cannibalize a lot of our strategy side of services with the platform.
Right.
Is the concept, right? So a lot of the stuff we're doing strategically with services are all things that will eventually become embedded within the platform so that people will be, set up for success.
Fabulous. What a brilliant idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Or set of ideas. Grouping. Yeah. Very, very cool. Thomas, this has been so great. I know listeners are going to get so much value out of this across the board. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights. It's been a blast.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so much
much.
for joining
great.
us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.